Knowing that, let's look at what the state presented. But before we do that, we can agree upon a couple of things that are not in dispute. They said that Melly is a talented music artist. We agree with that. At the age of 19, based upon the evidence, he was making more money than probably everybody in this courtroom, including us. Number two. Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. You okay? Usually.
No, man, I was making more than him.
Number two is that Cortland Henry changed his clothes before he went to the hospital. That's what they said just 10 minutes ago. Number three, that there is absolutely no eyewitness that will implicate this young man to this crime, these crimes. Number four, they talk about premeditation. I suggest to you there is absolutely no evidence whatsoever to show premeditation. And the last one that we absolutely agree with, and they admit it, the Miramar Police Department lacks the training. Those aren't my words. That was Miss Bradley just an hour ago saying. Not only did Miss Bradley say that, but Sergeant Williams also said they lacked the training in one of the worst investigations. That's why I pushed aside their reports. Now, the state produced over 100 exhibits sitting right here on the floor. Ms. Bradley made reference to some of them. They're all here. And I put them on this side of the podium because I suggest to you that this is a smoke screen. I suggest to you that this is open for anybody to interpret any way they want. When I say something sarcastic, you don't know if I'm serious or not. I can tell my colleague, I hate your guts, and it could be joking, and I am joking. And that's what this case is, and that's all this evidence is open for interpretation. That's not evidence proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Now I put on this side of the table really the evidence that means something. There's one other exhibit, but it's on a little USB internet thing. And that is the video leaving the studio, showing the 2 cars and the 8 individuals that left. Sitting on this side of the table is a broken cell phone that Moretti could not tell you whose it was, and the 9807 phone that Melly uses, as other people do too. These are the 2 key pieces of evidence. These are what I suggest you focus in on, because you can take any one of these items, any one of these text messages, any one of these pinging on maps, and you still don't know what was said, what was meant, and more importantly, who said it. I leave my phone, and I'm sure you all, in the house, and my wife picks it up and sends a message. And it looks like it's coming from me. And sometimes she sends messages that I'm kind of shocked about. But it's, you don't know. So let's put the 100 plus exhibits to the side for a moment. The state called 26 witnesses. I think I counted. And I suggest to you that you should look at 11 witnesses very carefully. And why do I say that? Because when you look at these 11 witnesses, you will find out that there's a conflict in the testimony, that there is a lack of testimony, and the third way is from the testimony itself. The first one that I would like to talk about well, before I talk about the first witness, I want you to remember one thing. On October 26th, that day of the shooting, we learned immediately that that Jeep was taken to a secure area. And it was searched for over 15 hours by 2 crime scene technicians. And you heard how they pulled out the evidence. They got some foam, some projectiles, I think a can, everything, and photographed the vehicle. Now, why is that important? Because that vehicle was searched. Are you okay? You want to take a break? That vehicle was searched again months later. But it didn't stop there. Because about 3 years later, miraculously, even though it was searched for hours by crime scene technicians, Sergeant Williams comes into the scene at the request of the state of Florida, this particular prosecutor right here, and miraculously he finds additional evidence, 2 projectiles and a bloodstain that obviously everyone else missed. That should tell you something about the quality of this investigation. That should give you a clue as to what's going on in this case. What happened was, once they got the surveillance tape of the individuals leaving the studio, they knew that Cortland Henry, Williams, Thomas, and this young man got into the Jeep. It's shown on the video. In the Mitsubishi were Adrian Davis, Patrick DeLoach, Trevon Glass, and I'm missing one other one. Withers, Dontavius Withers. And we know that on October 26th, when Moretti saw that surveillance, Cortland Henry identified all of them. And in fact told them that he lives at this young man's house. I made a mistake. Jacoby Mills was involved. It was Jacoby Mills, Adrian Davis, Trevon Glass, and Dontavius Withers. Okay? I can't keep the names straight. I'm lucky if I can remember my own name. That's why I haven't written it down. We know that Moretti identified all 8 people that left the studio on October 26th. We also know that Moretti knew where this young man lived, along with all the other 7 people that left the studio. We all know that, according to the state, Cortland Henry lied to the police. And we also know, as the investigation progressed, that Cortland Henry had blood matching the victim on his clothes. And he also had GSR, or gunshot residue, on his clothes. If that were true, and you saw the pictures of the Jeep, all bloody, blood all over the place, and we learned that you could spray and determine if there was blood right here on the carpet, even though you don't see it, why in the heck don't you get a search warrant for the house? Why in the heck don't you? Don't tell us we didn't know where he lived. Don't tell us it was months later, because they go into the car 4 years later and do this. So why don't you do it?
Sloppy work.
Because Detective Melly and the Miramar Police Department, as everyone has said, lacks the experience and the training.
Damn.
We don't have to do a darn thing, folks. We don't have to do a thing. But let's go into the 11 witnesses now. The first one, and they mentioned it, George Bello, the manager, the head guy of the gun and tool mark unit of the entire Broward Sheriff's Office. And he tells you, after we get a great education of guns and projectiles and casings, we have to bring out the fact that can you tell or determine the distance between the shooter and the victim? Can you tell us that with all your experience?
They just poke a
What
hole
does
in
it say?
everything.
I can't do it unless I have the weapon, unless I have the ammunition, because ammunition, the weight of ammunition, could change the distance, and you have to have the weapon in order to do that. He cannot even tell us if it was one gun, two guns, or more. He's honest. He tells you that without
This guy's
the
really
weapon
convincing,
used,
man.
I cannot place the shooter to the victim, or victims in this case. Now, why is that important? Because a reasonable doubt can arise from a conflict in the testimony. If you believe George Bello, and I suggest you should, then he totally contradicts all the testimony of Sergeant Williams, who comes in here 4 and 5 years later and says, I can tell you where shooter one was, and I can tell you who the shooter is. You talk about a conflict in the testimony? It's one or the other. It can't be both. And he tells you, in addition to that, that the environment has to be considered. Now, Williams tells you he goes out to the scene some 4 or 5 years later and has no idea, nor did he even check the terrain, the environment on that particular morning hour. So you got to believe one or the other. You can't believe both of them because they are in direct conflict with each other. But let's go further. The next witness that you should consider is FBI agent Brendan Collins. He is an expert in tracking phones. He is not only an expert in Broward County, but he's an expert, and his team have been specially trained to map phones, not only in this country, but anywhere in the world if he's called upon. They brought him in. And what does he tell you? This expert. I cannot determine precisely the location of a phone. I cannot say 100% the phone is in, and you saw the band, it looks like a banana. He says, I think it's somewhere within this area, but I can't be 100% sure. He's candid with you. And he further tells you that the call detail records are limited. And I can't tell you who had the phone at any particular time. And most importantly, he tells you in making the mapping of the phones, the FBI, the special agents, do not use two items that are on the bill. That is the environment section, and he does not map out based upon the longitude and latitude. He goes to the cell towers and where they're bouncing off. And it could vary depending upon the strongest signal or how busy that network is. Well, he contradicts Williams, the one who comes up and tells you the phone is at this location here, this location here, this location here, at these particular times. It's one or the other, folks. I suggest to you there's another conflict in the testimony. The next witness I think you need to pay particular attention to and really get a flavor of what this case is all about is Felicia Holmes. Felicia Holmes tells you that the Miramar detectives, Moretti and his group, threatened her, bullied her daughter, told potential witnesses they were going to prison, told witnesses that they may never see their children again, told a witness that he was going to be deported even though he's been in this country since 5 years old. He was going to be deported to Haiti where they won't feed you. The place is, with all due respect, and excuse my language, but it was his language that he used, shit. This is the great detective. This is why this kid's sitting here. They have intimidated and threatened everybody. So I ask you, I beg you, to consider Felicia Holmes, because that tells you what's going on. When Moretti got that surveillance tape and realized this young man, this little kid, excuse me for calling him a kid, he was 19 at the time, was a rap star, making more money than he'll ever see in his entire career at 19. He got tunnel vision. And he wanted to nail this kid. And what better way to move up the ranks, get some publicity, is to arrest the star. If they arrest Howard or myself, they go, who the hell is Addleston? Who the hell is Howard? That's the bottom line. So he just focused
That's the bottom line.
Everything was
Because this
directed
lawyer said so.
to get this kid. That's why he ignored everything. And that's why he intimidated and threatened anybody that said something different. So I ask you to pay attention to Felicia Holmes, because you do get an idea of what this investigation is. The fourth witness was Kurt Rhodes, the DNA expert. Now, why is he important? Because While we were picking a jury in April, and we were off in May, this prosecutor asked him to go back to the car and check some DNA. Now, why would you do that? The case, according to Moretti, is closed as soon as this young man is arrested. Why do you go back 5 years and ask an expert, a DNA expert, to do some more testing? This kid walked into the Broward, voluntarily surrendered. And 5 years later, they had the audacity to say, do a little more testing. Why? Because now we're in trial. And they realize there's problems in the case.
God damn, bro.
Why else would you do it? Three years after this young man surrenders, they bring in Danny Polo. I call him the masked man. He came in here for a few hours, if you recall, got on this witness stand and wore a ski mask over his entire face where you could only see his eyes. They came in here. He got involved in 2022 at the request, again, of the state, the prosecutors. What was the purpose of that? The great gang expert? They wanted to link him to some gang. You know, in the rap culture, whether you want to accept it or not, gangs are attracted to it. If you want to be successful in rap music,
Don't.
you are going to pick up some of the nuances of various gangs. Snoop Dogg, to this day, it was. Oh, fine.
No problem. Again, ladies and gentlemen, this is an argument. All right? Just proceed, counsel. Objection those overruled.
Snoop Dogg, to this day, does hand signs of a gang. And he does that because he realizes it promotes his music.
Did it at the Super Bowl, goddamn.
That's the bottom line. And because he wants to promote his music, make money, he's all of a sudden this big gang guy. And they wait till 2022 to bring him in. I thought the case was closed, according to Murray. And they show you some text messages from, I think it was Gino Herc and Quando Wando, who fought with Anthony
Those
Williams
captions is all off.
previously. Now, certainly, if the investigation is being fair and you want to find who was involved in this case, you would relay that information to the lead detective of people of interest or suspects. And what do we find out? Moretti has no idea who Gino is, no idea who Herc is, and doesn't know about Quando Wando. This is the great investigation. But he also refers to some text messages where those individuals that are in fact associated with the gang text him and he's not responding. And to the point of not responding, they say they're going to put you on the plate. Now that's not for dinner. That's not for breakfast. We learned what that means. If you don't start responding to us, we're going to have you killed. What the heck's going on? Why wouldn't you investigate this? They want you to believe that there's no evidence of that. How do they know there's no evidence if they don't investigate? They don't search. They don't look. You got all these phones. Get Gino and her. You have their text messages. Go get their phones. Track them and see. We don't have to do a thing, folks. The presumption of innocence stays with us during the entire trial until and if they can prove beyond every reasonable doubt that this young man did anything wrong. Moretti didn't want to look at that. Why? Because God forbid they find some evidence. His arrest of a star is down the tubes. That's the bottom line.
Is that it? You ready?
I want you to pay particular attention to Dr. McDougall and Dr. Saunders.
Alright.
Because those two doctors, one being the chief medical examiner of Broward County, the other one, an associate medical examiner, I think now employed in West Palm Beach, say to you that the first shot to Williams and Thomas were fatal, deadly. Why is that important? Because according to Sergeant Williams, Thomas's injury to his hand came first. It was a defensive wound. We know that couldn't happen based upon the medical testimony. So you either have to disregard the medical examiner and accept what Williams' testimony is, or I suggest, now that you have four experts contradicting Williams' testimony, and that is Bello, Special Agent, FBI Agent Collins, and two medical examiners, conflict with Williams' testimony, that you should take Williams' testimony and ignore it, toss it out. You can't have it both ways. It just doesn't work. And then we get to really their star witness, two star witnesses. Sergeant Williams. And I think I've talked a bit about him. And I think the most amazing part of his testimony is that he does not get involved in this case until 3 years after the incident. Again, at the request of the state. Again, because they realize they have problems. And I applaud them to recognize they have problems. And miraculously, as I told you earlier, even though the Jeep was searched for hours and hours, processed for hours and hours, he finds additional evidence. 2 projectiles that everyone else missed, and a blood stain that is important. And that when he did his analysis, 2 important things occurred. He didn't go in there blindly to do any analysis. He told you that the prosecutors in this case told them that the defendant in this case was this young man. And we need you to do a trajectory analysis to put him on the scene. Now, I suggest to you, you could have a Jolly Green Giant and a midget. And if you give them the dimensions the height and his arm length, with this mathematical formula, you could say the Jolly Green Giant or the midget was a shooter in this case. They would either be closer to the car
Goddamn,
or
it's like
further
30
from
minutes.
the car, depending upon their size. If you want to do an analysis, if you want to do
Hey, I'm about to cut it off right here. I mean, he's pretty much like just restating stuff over and over in different ways, poking holes all in the prosecution's argument. But this video getting kind of long, man. I gotta end it right here, man. I'll be back for the verdict. That's all, folks.
Bro, hit me on the phone.